All right, everyone, thank you very much for taking the time out of your day to come to this event. My name is Joseph. I work for Union Group Relocation. I'm also a part of the YP committee, the Young Professionals Committee for Chamber of Commerce. And today I'd like to introduce Howard Chan. He is one of the directors for Michael Page here in Hong Kong. He's been in the business for quite a long time. And he was to talk to us today about the 2015 outlook for Greater China in terms of salary and incentives and some of the non-financial portions of trying to incentivize your staff. So I'll hand it off to Howard.
Great, thank you very much, Joseph.
Sorry, one thing. Cell phones off, please. Or on my phone.
Thanks, Joseph. First of all, Joseph, thank you very much for the invite to this event. I'm just going to work the technology here just to make sure I get the first slide up. Perfect. Okay, so first of all, I want to make sure you guys are all here for the right reasons. We're here to talk about the salary employment outlook for 2015. Okay? So before I begin, I'd just like to give a quick introduction about myself. So I'm the director of Michael Page. The areas I focus on is primarily the Hong Kong market. We're talking about sales, marketing, digital, procurement supply chain, and retail and sourcing. Those are the key markets that I focus on. Okay? Now, I know we have a relatively small group today, so I'd like to make today's event as interactive as possible. Instead of the traditional Q&A session towards the end of the presentation, I'd like to you guys are welcome to ask any questions along the way as I go through the slides. So I welcome you guys to participate as much as you can. Okay? I truly hope that through today's session, you guys could pick up some information that you find useful for yourselves. What I observed and noticed was, before we start, some of you were flipping to perhaps the middle to end pages of this book. Some of you were going, others were like, not sure. So I hope we can have some color on where you guys position yourself in the market, and certainly I welcome any questions that come along the way. Mike, okay, let's try this one. Actually, I'm gonna sit down. Okay, so let's talk about the agenda for today. A couple of things I'm going to cover. First of all, quick introduction about Michael Page. Secondly, about Michael Page. 2015 Greater China Salary Employment Outlook, factors impacting the recruitment market in Greater China, key findings from our survey, okay? And last but not least, a quick summary of our findings for 2015. Okay? So about Michael Page, quick question. Do you guys know what Michael Page is or what we do?
Yes.
No? Yes, no? Maybe? Just very quickly, we were established, Michael Page in Hong Kong has been established since 1994, okay? And in terms of our size, in terms of market share, we're one of the market leaders, definitely in Asia. So we're talking about 17 offices here. We have offices across mainland China. We have 5 offices in China, okay? In southern and eastern, northern China. We have operations, obviously, in Hong Kong. We have 3 offices in Hong Kong. We have offices in India, Japan, Malaysia, Indonesia, Singapore, and Taiwan. Okay. Now, across the region, we have around 800 people, okay, 800 consultants. And last year was our 20th year anniversary, so this year is our 21st year anniversary. Okay. Don't want to bore you too much about Michael Page, as I know you guys are more interested about the salary and outlook. Okay. So, in terms of the survey and the outlook, I want to just quickly go through some of the content that we'll run through, okay? And I'm going to sit down now because I know the camera needs to focus. So the employment outlook really covers the latest hiring expectations, recruitment challenges, and pretty much the salary forecast that we foresee for this year. So in terms of the outlook for Greater China, so I'll talk about Greater China first, and then I'll move on to different regions across Asia. Across Greater China. So what does this report indicate? And I'm sure each of you have a report on your table. So what does it cover? First of all, it covers the findings from the online surveys that we have surveyed over 2,000 people, okay? And that's employers that we've interviewed. It's an interview that we've conducted with subject experts within the different fields and industries that we work with as well, okay? We also have very close relationships with a lot of HR professionals and practitioners who are experts in the market. Okay? And we've also interviewed experts, for example, Sean, who's the founder of China Market Research Group, as well as Dr. Clint Laurent, who's also the founder and managing director of the Global Demographics Group. So in terms of our resource for this particular survey, this is how we have collated the data. Okay? Okay, so what are the key factors impacting the recruitment in Greater China? Okay, so a couple of points to highlight. Employee turnover is driven by the desire to increase salary. Okay, so this is still the case for the region. Okay, every time we talk about employee turnover, why do people change jobs? It's still about salary. Okay, and that's a fact that, let's be honest, it's hard to change. Now, the change, though, if you can see in point 2, is the alternative side. We're looking at non-financial rewards. Okay, are gaining importance as employers resist large salary hikes. Okay, so I'll elaborate further in terms of the non-financial rewards that employers are offering to employees to retain them and to attract them. Okay, soft skills. Okay, we're talking about commercial acumen, communication skills are very important. I mean, we're not only talking about technical capability, we're not only talking about ability to deliver results, but it's more about how you deliver the results. You know, what is the appeal? What is the approach? How do you influence? How do you communicate? Those are some of the key things that a lot of employers are looking for. Okay? Now, a shift from manufacturing-led to a services and consumption-led economy is underway. So, as you can probably tell, I mean, within the Greater China region, there is a shift in the dynamics of the industries, right? I mean, if we talked 10 years ago, 20 years ago, certainly we would think of China as more of a manufacturing hub. But due to changes in currency, foreign exchange, labor costs, there is definitely a dynamic in terms of a shift in movement to the Southeast Asia region for more manufacturing and production facilities, as opposed to having China as the key sourcing hub for manufacturing production. The shift is that we're moving more into more of a service-oriented industry and function for Greater China, and that's the trend that we foresee. Last but not least, when we talk about Chinese employers, I mean, there are a lot of very powerful brands that are gaining prominence in the market. I mean, you can think of the tech companies, Xiaomi, for example, or the digital companies like Tencent. I mean, these are very dominant players in the market that weren't in existence. You know, if we talk about 10 years ago, we probably would have never heard of these companies. Alibaba is a classic example. We have a lot of these companies that are gaining prominence. And when we talk about multinational companies nowadays, you know, it's not the traditional paradigm of only the Fortune 500 US listed companies. We're talking about China-based, you know, dominant players as well. Okay. Any questions about this slide before I continue? No? Okay, so I'm going to start by elaborating on the rise of Chinese employer brands. So when we talk about talent sourcing, I mean, in the past, I think if we were to source talent to move if we were to source a talent to be based in China, it would mostly import a talent from, you know, European markets, America, North America, or even through Hong Kong, right? But a lot of times the attraction in the past would be to give expat package and give a wonderful salary, right? But nowadays, I think the whole talent sourcing strategy is becoming a little bit more sophisticated. You know, they're adopting different talent management strategies and different value propositions. You know, it's not just about giving money out to hire people. It's actually more about the value propositions of career development, growth, exposure, and pretty much the excitement of growing within an organization, taking the business from point A to point B and taking it to another level. That's the sort of pitch that a lot of clients would have, the China-based multinationals would have for their employees, as opposed to saying, I'll give you a fantastic extra package, come join us. It's not as simple as that. Okay? So increasingly, Chinese companies have powerful employer brands that position them as desirable places to work. I think I've spoken about that already, and I think a lot of us can relate to these companies. Simply put, a lot of these companies, you know, they've gone IPO, you can look at their stock price. I mean, it's very clear that they have a huge growth opportunity and potential, and that is certainly attraction for a lot of candidates who want to work for these companies. And in terms of their sourcing strategy, they're trying to tap into candidates who work for other multinationals as well to help them uplift and upgrade their skill sets. Okay? Now, in terms of the trends that we see from an industry standpoint, we would foresee industries such as technology, logistics, financial services, and digital marketing. Those are some of the key areas that we foresee a change or an upgrade in demand for the sort of the China sort of market. Okay, so in terms of key findings, the good news that I can share with all of you is that hiring activity is still fairly robust across the Greater China region. Okay, so you can see, I don't know if you guys can see this chart from the back, but just to share, I mean, 47% of employers across the region report that there will be stronger recruitment activity, okay, this month, or starting this year relative to 12 months ago. Okay, so almost half of the people that we surveyed has basically told us, yeah, we're still looking to hire, we're still looking to recruit. And you can see, if you look at the different sort of sectors, I mean, 51% of the people surveyed in Hong Kong plan to increase headcount, okay, this year. And in regions like China and Taiwan, it's even more robust. We're looking at 53% in China. We're looking at 63% in Taiwan. So the good news is that, look, the market is actually pretty good, particularly in the Greater China region. If you look at Hong Kong, China, and Taiwan in isolation, they all have very positive sentiments towards hiring and obviously increasing headcount. And for certain organizations, they're still looking at growing the business. Okay? Okay, so let's talk about the Hong Kong region first. So Hong Kong, as being Hong Kong and being all of us being in Central, it's still a vibrant financial center. Okay, and for Hong Kong, a lot of the regional headquarters are still based in Hong Kong. Okay, but when we talk about regional hubs being in Hong Kong, they're not in the size and scale as it used to be. Okay, we're talking about mostly the management layer of people are here. Key decision-making processes are still based in Hong Kong. And when we talk about regional hub, it's not just for Greater China. It's mostly for, let's say, the Asia-Pacific region. Okay? For other, I would say, functions of organizations, they might outsource it to other regions like China or even Southeast Asia. So whilst I would say, the market sentiment is still very positive, but I would think that the sort of the hiring strategy or the approach for clients would be relatively conservative relative to the most buoyant periods of the Hong Kong market in the last 10, 15 years, which was 2006 and 2007. This was the time where it was an extremely candidate short market. Talent was highly sought after. There were a lot of organizations going IPO, or there were a lot of companies investing into Hong Kong. Those were one of the best times in terms of the Hong Kong economy and the market. And this is when it was almost a price war to hire talent. One company is offering 20% increment, the other one's offering 30%. It's just like, wow, it just becomes like a stock market almost. It's just really competitive. It's not like that anymore. After the global financial crisis, the whole market sentiment has changed a lot. Okay, organizations know that if they were to set up a business in Hong Kong, or if they were to expand, or if they were to grow, they want to do it in a very conservative way. They're going to hire headcount. Yes, they're going to grow. They're going to increase, hiring, but in a very steady manner, and not just, wow, I need to make a splash and have 20, 30 people at one go. It's not like that anymore. Okay, they want to be a little bit more cautious in their hiring process. And yeah, I talked about the Asia presence already. Okay, so in terms of the industry highlights, I'm not sure, once again, if you guys can see the table from the back, but these are some of the key sort of positions, okay, that are in highest demand. Okay, so once again, can you guys see from the back? Because if you can, I'm not going to elaborate too much. And just to get a show of hands, I mean, how many of you guys are from the finance or financial services sector? Can I get a show of hands? Two, okay. Any from sort of the commercial sales and marketing field? Yeah. And any from sort of the legal Professional service, property side? Any professionals from there? No? Okay. Any from technology, HR? Technology? Yeah. Wonderful. So it's good to know that there's a mix. And last but not least, retail. Anyone from retail? Cool. So we have a mix of people. Wonderful. The good news is that there's obviously demands for each of these divisions. Are you guys in there? I don't know. You guys can take a look. Okay. Now, in terms of northern China, Beijing and northern China. So we're talking about multinationals having entered consolidated phases and are seeking efficiencies to ensure sustained long-term growth. What that means is, back in the days, if we talk about Beijing, companies are looking to invest into that market, and all they think about is just having a platform there. But now, the plan is more long-term. I mean, they have an established presence there. How can they continue to sustain their business? And from a strategic point of view, it's not about having a presence in the first-tier city anymore. It's more about how do we move on to second-tier, third-tier cities? How do we broaden our remit? How do we increase our market share? Okay, so it's a slightly different strategy in terms of how they want to develop their business. Now, we also see an influx in privately held companies. So we're not only talking about the huge multinational listed companies in China. We're also talking about enterprises that are privately owned. A lot of startups. There's a lot of demand for startups in China. Okay, so in terms of, once again, industry highlights. So what are the sectors that are increasing in demand by sort of the industry sector? We look at technology, once again, telecom, media, finance, HR. These are the industry or the specialisms that are in high demand in northern China and Beijing. Okay. The industries that are in a little bit more of a steady mode, I would say, in terms of development growth would be procurement, manufacturing industries, more on that sort of production side of things. And the industry that we see a potential decline for this year would be the sort of the FMCG sort of retail market. Okay. Now, the main reason for that is because Beijing is getting expensive. They're moving more to the sort of the southern part of China. This is for the FMCG side in particular. Okay, so let's talk about Shanghai and Eastern China. So once again, market demand for finance professionals remains strong. I think if we think of China, Shanghai would be Shanghai and Beijing would generally be the first two places you think of. Okay, but from a finance point of view, Shanghai would be more of a dominant player as a financial hub relative to Beijing. Okay. As you can all foresee, particularly those who are in technology, I think the digital boom is absolutely paramount. I mean, everything is going digital, literally. And you can tell from the likes of, let's say, Alibaba and all the other online platforms, Tencent. I mean, these are extremely valuable, businesses who have created a lot of value, okay, through obviously the change in technology, change in demand, change in consumer behavior. Things that we did not foresee at least 10 years ago. These companies were non-existent almost 10 years ago. Okay? And certainly in the China market, with the population that China has, the digital space is absolutely an area that is in increasing demand. Retail space, as I mentioned earlier, the shift is more moving towards sort of the second tier and third tier cities. I mean, all of the luxury brands, all of the key retailers, okay, they already have a very strong presence in China. Right? There's no doubt about that. The challenge for them really is, okay, now that we have a presence in China, in Shanghai and Beijing, how do we penetrate into the second tier and third tier cities and appeal to the right audience? Okay? I mean, if you think of the demographics, the spending behavior of people in second tier and third tier cities, it could be quite different to the first tier cities. But how do we grow into those markets? Okay? Those are some of the challenges that companies are facing. Okay, and then of course, I talked about the second tier and third tier issue as well. So in Shanghai, what are the, sorry, question? No. Oh, okay, sorry. Being sensitive here, I saw a finger point up. Okay, so what are some of the roles that are in demand in Shanghai? Okay, so as you can see, finance professionals, financial services, digital, and e-commerce. Those are some of the key roles that are in high demand in Shanghai. Those that are in a relatively flat demand or stable sort of demand would be those that are in retail, luxury brands, and to some extent, property and construction as well. I mean, over the last few years, there's been expansive development, heavy investment into that market. But I find that that's kind of waned a little bit over the last few years. The shift has definitely moved on to more on the digital side. In terms of the sourcing side, manufacturing, once again, I've talked about this earlier, there's been more of a shift in terms of moving the manufacturing production facilities out of China or from the first two cities into the Southeast Asia regions, where employment cost is a little bit lower and it's in a more favorable sort of foreign exchange as well.
Are they also moving down south to Dongguan and Guangzhou as well?
Some of them are. The key challenge for hiring in China is that if you look at the average or even the minimum wage side of things, it's still higher than the likes of a Vietnam or Cambodia or even Sri Lanka. It really depends on which sector we talk about. So industries like apparel, for example, they're definitely shifting away to the Vietnams and the Cambodias and Sri Lankas. But there are obviously some industry sectors, production facilities that are still based in southern China. For example, technology. I mean, there's so much investment into technology production that it's obviously a heavy investment to relocate the whole facility to a different site. Instead, they might, open another factory in Southeast Asia region, but they're not looking to expand their Southeast Asia region presence. Yeah. Okay, so moving on to southern China. Guangdong, I mean, in comparison, if we look at northern China and southern China, then absolutely the southern China market is still considered more of the manufacturing part of the sort of the whole China market. Even though I mentioned there is a shift in manufacturing facilities moving away, but obviously there's still a manufacturing production sites, many of them obviously, particularly in the Dongguan area. Not so much in Guangzhou, in my opinion. Guangzhou, Shenzhen, definitely moving away from those cities. Once again, getting very expensive. But Dongguan, there are a lot of these manufacturing production parks. There are various themed parks that they have for different production facilities, research centers, et cetera, et cetera. Yes, they still exist. But what I'm saying is that it's not as prominent as it used to be. Okay? So I've elaborated on the e-commerce side, so I'm not going to talk too much about that. In terms of the focus of organizations, particularly from a production side of things, we're looking at productivity, efficiency, quality assurance. I mean, these are some of the key things that's been focused on for the last year or so, predominantly on the compliance side of things. You have a lot of production facilities in China, particularly for the technology side, as I mentioned earlier. You don't want an iPhone charger blowing up on you. It's just not going to happen, right? So the whole sort of compliance, quality assurance thing is the key part for a lot of the companies.
Sorry, Howard, are they hiring in southern China for this, or are they still asking senior players in Hong Kong just to pop up there for one day and come back down, since it's only a day trip?
Sure. I think the shift in the demand would be for those professionals to be based in China now, as opposed to do the day trip thing, because they find that it's not as efficient. I mean, you need to be literally at the production site to be able to manage and control the situation. And the interesting thing is, people are more receptive to relocating. It's going to be, basically stationing in China for the week and then coming back to Hong Kong over the weekend. Or some people are more receptive to relocating, including their family. I mean, the whole China movement, I would say, has changed. I think if we think once again, 10 years ago, moving to China would be, some people would say it's a bit of a hardship. You would actually get allowances to move to China, a daily allowance. Nowadays, people are raising their hand to go to China. Now, there's many reasons why this is happening. I mean, I've mentioned the foreign exchange side of things. Before, 90 cents to the dollar. Now it's, the dollar to 23%. So there's almost a 30% difference in the value of the dollar by simply just moving to China. The caveat of working in China, though, is definitely the different tax regimes. Hong Kong has one of the lowest tax rates in the world. China actually has a very high tax rate. So what we're actually finding is that whilst the candidates are more receptive to moving to China, and let's be honest, in the last 10 years, the infrastructure of China, the environment, a lot of things have changed. It's a little bit different. So definitely it's more welcoming for people to relocate. But the interesting thing is, okay, whilst candidates are more willing to move to China, employers are not as willing to relocate people due to the tax reason that I mentioned. Because they can actually hire locally. They can hire a local PRC national with the same talent, with the same skill set, and more importantly, the language capability, right? I mean, before they would import a lot of talent from overseas or from Hong Kong, mainly due to, it could be a cultural reason, language reason, or just an understanding of the business, okay? And because when you have multinationals coming, you generally want to bring people from the similar backgrounds and profiles. But moving on to 10 years later, different generation of people, you have a lot of PRC nationals who have been overseas educated, amazing language capabilities, at times better than those in Hong Kong. Then they would rather do that and have them undergo sort of a local contract as opposed to offering an expat contract, which at times is almost double the salary of what they would offer locally. But it's, in terms of the return on investment, the gap is actually becoming smaller and smaller. I hope that answers your question. Yeah? Cool. Sorry, any other questions before I continue? No? Don't be shy.
Can you talk more about,
Thank you.
Can you talk more about Shenzhen in particular?
Sure.
Terms of, obviously, there's all the big tech companies are
Yeah.
from Shenzhen, but is the trend really that Shenzhen is going to be seen as the hub of technology for all of China? Do you think that's really the direction that the government wants Shenzhen?
Sure. I think there's two parts of the answer. The government wants to make Shenzhen the hub of technology, so they're investing a lot into building a platform for that to happen. But whether it is the case at the moment, I think it's still work in progress. I know I mentioned in this slide, it's, Shenzhen is potentially the Silicon Valley of China. Well, that's still work in progress, absolutely. And the interesting thing about technology is that there's two sides of technology. There's obviously the hardware side, right? Which, yes, we're talking about production, manufacturing facilities, right? But more importantly, I think nowadays we're talking more about software, apps. And those are things that, it's more driven from the startups, the small organizations that build from a small platform to a large platform. And they can be based anywhere. They don't need to be based in Shenzhen to set up an app, right? They can be based anywhere. So the intention from the Chinese government is to create that sort of feel. But whether it's happening yet, I think it's still work in progress. Yeah, because, there are a lot of companies who are already established there. But whether there's more foreign investments into, or companies willing to relocate to Shenzhen, that's the question mark. Yeah. Other questions?
The question about the
Yeah.
hiring activity that you shared before, you said that seems like Hong Kong and also in China
Yeah.
is stronger on the hiring activity. But what does it mean to be high or stronger? Because it
Yeah.
could be positive that it's expanding, but it could be negative that the turnover rate isn't growing. So
Sure.
what does that mean high? What's that?
So what you're saying is that there's turnover and then there's also expansion. So how do I differentiate the two? Is that what you mean?
Yeah.
Okay.
How's the situation trend?
Okay, so let's be pragmatic here. In a market like Hong Kong, turnover is imminent, right? People come to Hong Kong, they're opportunists, they want to find great opportunities. And let's be honest, Hong Kong has a lot of opportunities. As an international hub, I would think that Hong Kong has probably more opportunities than most places in the world. Because why? You can think of any organization in the world, and they would probably have a platform or a presence in Hong Kong. So in terms of opportunities, definitely there's more. And that's why there's more turnover in Hong Kong, because people have more opportunities to select from. When it comes to the second part of your question, in terms of, okay, so there's turnover. But what about, people who, sorry, the second part was more about why people change jobs, or the increase in headcount, right? Okay, so when we talk about increase in headcount, there are companies who are still setting up in Hong Kong, interestingly enough. They don't have a presence here. Why I say that? There are a lot of European companies, okay? If you think from a sourcing, retailing point of view, they still don't have a presence in Hong Kong, and they're looking to set up. So they're definitely increasing headcount, right? Obviously, there are a lot of industries that are more conservative in their hiring approach, which would be, let's say, the financial services sector. But there's natural attrition. There's turnover. There needs to be replacements. That to some extent is sort of that sort of balances out. But there are a lot of individual sort of sectors within, let's say, a banking sector where there is an increase in demand for hiring. For example, in banking, I would say compliance is an area that there's definitely increase in hiring activity. Because if you look at all of the new legislations and regulations and et cetera, we need more specialists in that area. If you recall, back in 2003, 2004, after the Enron case, all of a sudden there was an influx in demand for people who knows Sarbanes-Oxley, right? This is a very American thing, right? SOX 404. And so all of a sudden, due to new sort of policies, procedures, every US company had to abide to SOX. And so all of a sudden, there's an influx of demand for that. It's a similar case nowadays, but it's different regulations, different policies. But there are certain roles and functions that are still in high demand. Hence, that's why there's still an increase in headcount for those particular roles. But to generalize, I would say some sectors, yes, they're increasing, but for some, it's actually not. Or some are actually moving away from Hong Kong. It really depends on which market and which sector we talk about. Yeah. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
You sure? you can further.
It's like, can I really tell, like more concrete picture about the trend of the?
Yeah, I get what you're saying. It really depends on, yeah. I think to answer your question, and we can probably discuss later, it really depends on the industry, it depends on the function of the role, it depends on what market you're talking about. But I mean, this overview is more of a general sort of macro view of the market. But certainly, yes, by industry, there's always a difference in that space. So we can certainly discuss later. No problem. Any other questions? I like the questions, so keep it up.
I don't know if this is a little off topic, but
Sure.
Going back to the financial services sector.
Yeah.
So what are you seeing with Hong Kong as a financial hub as compared to Singapore? Because Singapore obviously has been trying to build up their financial services and attract hedge funds and banks and different investment companies. So is Hong Kong still losing its edge in terms of, obviously financial services makes up a very big portion of the economy in Hong Kong.
Yeah.
Is it losing its edge compared to Singapore?
Sure. I mean, I can give my view on this, and it's only my view. I don't want to speak on behalf of Hong Kong, but my view is that the Hong Kong market is not as attractive as it used to be because other countries are becoming more and more competitive. And there's definitely a shift in the demand to enter different markets, hence, once again, making Hong Kong less competitive. So, for example, not only Singapore, but to some extent, China. A lot of banks are moving to China because that's the market where the money is at, right? Are foreign investments as high in a market like Hong Kong as it used to be? I think there's some money leaking out of Hong Kong to the markets like China and Singapore. In terms of the functions of the role, there are a lot of functions that have already been shifted to Singapore. For a lot of the investment banks, for example, a lot of more of the support back office type of roles. For example, if we think about procurement, the procurement teams for a lot of investment banks, GS, UBS, they're all in Singapore, right? They were all based in Hong Kong in the past, but now they've moved. Now, Singapore as a country, they're offering very attractive incentives to a lot of organizations to set up, a lot of tax incentives, which also makes those countries more attractive. So there's different reasons why I think could be banks, could be other commercial companies moving to places like Singapore. The China thing is pretty obvious. They want to invest into China. I mean, they foresee highest growth potential in the area. That's why they're willing to move there. Places like Singapore, tax benefit, and it's also the proximity to the Southeast Asia region. So when we talk about emerging markets, which sectors or which, so geographically, where are the areas that they could further expand or develop their markets? They want to be closer to those regions, right? Hong Kong is a very ideal place from an Asia-Pacific region point of view because it has access to China and Asia, right? But let's be honest, a lot of the banks that you think about, they've already had a presence in Hong Kong for God knows how many years, right? So it's not a new thing for them. The challenge for a lot of banks nowadays is where do they find new money, right? Where should they invest in? What are the new opportunities that they can go? And that's why they need to think strategically where they should be located to be in closer proximity to where they want to expand their markets and business. And where to outsource their functions in different countries to save costs. So it could be a labor cost difference as well. Because in comparison, the salary, let's say in China or in Singapore, could be lower than Hong Kong for certain functions and roles. Yep. Yep.
You haven't touched on the concerns around the pollution.
In China?
In China and Hong Kong. We've had great difficulty bringing expats over because of that issue.
Really?
Even
Okay.
if they have children.
Sure.
And we've lost people in China because of that issue.
Right.
So you haven't, Singapore seems to be attracting
Yeah.
multinationals
Yeah.
from one of the staffing benefits is the
Yeah.
cleaner environment.
Sure. That's a very good point. And you're right. I haven't mentioned the pollution side yet. My 2 cents on this situation is that, yes, it does impact a lot of expats when they come to Hong Kong, or particularly in Beijing. Obviously, a lot of smog, a lot of pollution. And this definitely affects expats who have family members. They want to come to those countries. They don't want their kids to grow up in an environment where it's very polluted. Has it detracted them from moving to China, though? I would say it's 50-50, because some people would take the chance of the pollution in return for a better career opportunity. Whilst, yes, for some, they do decide or choose to go to places like Singapore. And in comparison, Hong Kong is less polluted than Shanghai or Beijing, and they probably choose Hong Kong. But one thing to note, though, is a lot of times when expats choose to come to Greater China, pollution is certainly one factor, but it's also lifestyle change. How easy is it to settle into the city or the country? They factor a lot of different things. And yes, if pollution is a key, factor for that individual, then yes, it does affect them moving to here.
It seems to be more of a retention issue versus an attraction issue. We've had people leave
Because of pollution.
Yeah, and we've had
Wow.
external resources, whether
Yeah.
it be accountants or lawyers, whatever.
Sure. I've heard of that situation before as well. What usually happens is that, interestingly enough, they might actually relocate from Shanghai or Beijing to Hong Kong. They might not move to Singapore, but they still want to be within that sort of Greater China market. The other option is really to give them a regional role. So they have a broader remit and they're not always based in that country or city. But is it a retention issue? It is, but...
It's more selective, really.
I'm sorry?
It's more of a selective issue. I think if you have options, you take them, right?
Yeah, and once again, it boils down to the individual, because some people really enjoy Singapore for what Singapore can offer. But at the same time, from a lifestyle point of view, some people think, Hong Kong's more dynamic, it's more interesting. It's very subjective. But yes, that is a concern for some individuals, definitely. Yeah. But having said that, I think obviously China is well aware of this, and they're doing a lot to try and improve that situation. Because for them to continue to expand, they need to invest into bringing in talent into their markets as well. So how much they're doing is a question mark, but certainly it's something that they're aware of already. Yeah. And it's also traffic. It's not just pollution. It's a lot of things, right? Yeah. Sorry, before I continue, any other questions? How are we doing with time? Are we good? Okay, cool. Okay, so in terms of Southern China, I'm going to move on from this slide, actually. I think I talked about this earlier. People want to generally move for the right, their key motivator, regardless of what we hear in the market, is generally money, right? So when they move for money, particularly for outskirts, first tier, there's attraction, sure. But when you move to second tier, third tier cities, there's less attraction because the infrastructure is not as well established. Could be more pollution. There's so many different reasons. So money is still one of the key factors for people to change. Okay, so I'm going to skip through this slide because it's fairly self-explanatory. We're talking about salaries for people to change. Financial rewards. So the only thing I want to mention about the financial rewards part is that obviously candidates generally look for, salary as the key attribute, but there's always the bonus component. There are other sort of financial rewards they're tying into the role to retain people. It's not just looking at the guaranteed part, it's actually the other parts. Bonus, commission, it could also be shares. But in general, if you guys want a reference, the bonuses are about 6 to 10%. I mean, that's sort of the average of what clients are offering. But once again, a caveat is that it differs by the industry they're in. Certainly, if you're in a sales role, this is extremely low. It's never 6 to 10%. But if you're in a back office role, it's actually quite reasonable. This averages out to about a month to a month and a half salary.
So you're not talking about the 13th month, you're talking true bonus.
This is in addition. Yeah. Because I know in a lot of markets it's guaranteed. Right? But the interesting thing is with a lot of organizations, they look at an annual comp point of view, and they either divide it by 13 months or 12 months. So, yeah. Okay, so financial rewards. Once again, I mean, if you look at this graph, it's the 6 to 10%, which is the average. And the unfortunate thing is, as we go lower down the bar, 31 to 40 and above 40 is very low. And certainly there is a shift in moving the bonus component into a slightly higher percentage as we go along the way. In terms of salary increases, we're looking at about 1 to 5%. I mean, that's more of an inflation adjustment when it comes to salary adjustments for candidates in the market. And once again, the bonus is 6 to 10. Okay, in terms of salary highlights for Hong Kong, what we generally find is that in the junior market, we're looking at minimum wage level. It's still lower than most major cities and markets around the world. And this is still a pressing concern, obviously, as when we talk about standard of living in Hong Kong, accommodation, et cetera, it's one of the highest in the world. So, ironically, the salary is actually not that attractive. So, that's why there's such an issue in Hong Kong with people finding places to live, having a sustainable living, raising a family, et cetera, et cetera. It all boils down to this reason. And I know that, obviously the Hong Kong government is doing something about it, but it's a legislative issue that takes time, right? But as a reference, I mean, the minimum wage in Hong Kong is about half or a third of what Europe offers as a minimum wage, or, it's just a very different bar, right? At the middle level, it's a different story. Middle to middle senior level, it becomes more competitive because that's where most of the hiring activity takes place. We're looking at hiring more skilled, more talented individuals. The expectation is higher for them to have more contribution to their business. Clients are actually more flexible at that level to offer a more attractive package for them. Okay. So typically, if candidates were to change jobs in our industry, it's about 10 to 15% difference. So you would expect that type of premium when you're changing jobs. Now, certainly, this changes by industry sector once again. Okay. I think we briefly touched upon this turnover issue. Absolutely, Hong Kong still has a turnover issue because there's so many opportunities out there. Let's be honest. I mean, I don't even need a show of hands here, but I'm almost certain that all of you guys have probably received numerous headhunter calls. This year, it's only been like the second month, right? So it's very common in a place like Hong Kong to get opportunities. It's just as simple as that.
On the turnover side,
yeah,
you talked a few things are causing that.
Yeah.
And I think everyone experiences turnover.
Yes.
I know I do in our company. I find it's mostly younger people. This is when I start thinking about old. I've been home for 15 years. When I came
Sure.
to Hong Kong, we work till midnight sometimes. You got staff now who want to leave at 6 and they don't want to work very, very hard.
Yeah.
We hire somebody within 3 days they're leaving to a job that's near their home.
Sure.
And that's only from one shy to calls me paid.
That's a bit extreme, but yeah, okay.
I don't know what's so far.
Weird. So is there a problem from when looking at this as well about how the youth sees their careers? I read things about the own experiences.
Sure.
Rather than caring about the
Yeah.
cradle to grave or the longer term picture. find?
I think that's a great topic that, if you don't mind, I can answer at the Q&A session, because I love this topic. we personally, I mean, our company, we face similar issues as well. It's the whole generation thing and their expectations that is quite different to, what we're acquainted to in
Bloody annoying, that's what it is.
it is. I mean, I have to admit. And it's a big challenge, because the key, I think the biggest challenge for this generation is, what is it that motivates them? What is it that drives them? Because it's really hard to figure out what really motivates them and drives them. But look, I'm gonna put this down so I remember that we'll discuss this. Okay. So how about this? I mean, I'm very conscious of time. I'm going to run through the slides, and then once again, any questions, throw it out. Happy to go through it. But I want to make sure that we go through some of the content here. Okay. So you can see that in northern China, the pay raise or pay increases is more substantial than places like Hong Kong, because there's still a shortage of talent. So we're talking about 10 to 35%, at times, to bring in talent. Now, once again, we need to factor in the fact that some of the candidates are actually comparatively more underpaid for what they're contributing or what they're working at, as opposed to places like Hong Kong. So that's why the numbers look a bit skewed. You're thinking, wow, 30%, that's amazing. But if you're dealing with a lower base, then the numbers actually average out to about the same. And less the tax, it might be even less. So those are just some of the figures to share. Eastern China, at times 30 to 50%. I mean, once again, very substantial numbers. In Southern China, it's more sort of based to sort of the Hong Kong market, 1 to 10%. Okay, so what are the areas that we expect a shortage of skill sets? Mostly in sort of the sales, marketing, and business development type of roles. Okay, so in any market, there's always a shortage of really good salespeople. Why? Revenue generators. Which company would not like to bring in someone who's a revenue generator? Very straightforward stuff. Engineering and manufacturing, that's for selective industries and sectors. Once again, technology is a sector that's still in the growth stage. So very specific people. We're talking about product development people. We're talking about designers. We're talking about people who are mechanical, electronical engineers. Sort of taking the business from a technology point of view to the next level. General manager roles, and of course, the digital stuff is what I talked about earlier. So some of the sort of skill sets that are in high demand. I've mentioned the soft skill side earlier. I mean, we're not only talking about people with really good technical skills, they need to know how to communicate. A lot of organizations now, they're looking for a successor. They're not just looking for someone who can just do the job, okay? And that's the struggle when we talk about different generations. Do they even aspire to move up? They don't. They just want a job. But when we look for a successor, the ability to communicate, to lead, to influence, these are really, really key skill sets that, it's really hard to tell in an interview, right? When you interview them, you can kind of go through track record. But we find that this is some of the gap that a lot of employers are facing is, do we actually have the right talent to take our business to the next level? Do we even have the right successor? Language obviously is a key for a place like Hong Kong, or obviously in China particularly. Cantonese, Mandarin, in particular Mandarin. I think even in a market like Hong Kong, if you speak if you speak English, fluent English and Mandarin, no problem. If you speak English, Cantonese, but no Mandarin, then that might be a problem in terms of, obviously expanding your remit to places like Greater China. So what I'm trying to say is, English is still the primary language, absolutely, okay, for any organization. But the second language that's more important, I think, certainly is Mandarin superseding Cantonese. Okay. Okay. So in Hong Kong, hardest skills to source, I talked about sales, marketing, BD, technology, digital, followed by, once again, more technical. Oh, no problem. I welcome you guys to sit closer. And of course, the more technical R&D, QA roles. So discipline trends. In terms of the type of functions that they would like that employers would like to recruit for nowadays. We're talking about more, when we talk about employment, we're talking about people who have that sort of strategic business acumen mindset. These are some of the key things that employers are looking for. You know, relationship building, and obviously, you know, if in the financial sector, we're looking at more at the financial planning. But in terms of the sought after talent, those are some of the things that employers are looking for in the banking sector. In the engineering side, more technical side of things. So once again, engineering managers, quality managers, we're talking about mechanical, you know, mechanical, electronical, sort of product development type of functions. Those are the roles that are, once again, in demand. You know, I'm sure all of you are familiar with the Science Park in Hong Kong. That's predominantly an R&D center. So a lot of the design work is still done in Hong Kong, like Philips, for example. They have their whole Philips consumer business in Hong Kong. A lot of the household products that you use that are from Philips, for example, could be designed from Hong Kong. Okay. Over the finance side, when we talk about finance, this is more about the non-banking sector, so commerce finance. Okay. Key traits employers will look for. Okay, we're talking about industry experience. We're talking about advisory. So what do we mean by advisory? That's more on professional firm side, Big Four, for example. It's not just doing audits. It's not just doing tax. When we talk about advisory, it's more on the strategy side. You know, I'm not saying it touches upon management consultancy companies, but it's a bit of a hybrid, actually, taking on more of a financial stance. Advisory in terms of getting companies listed, pre-IPO activity, okay, due diligence, budgeting, forecasting, very standard stuff, right? General management. So, you know, in any organization, this is a key role for a lot of companies. And when we talk about general management, it's not just a focus on operations. It's, once again, taking on more of a strategic approach. And to some extent, P&L responsibility, even looking at business development and sales. HR side. The HR market in Hong Kong is a very well-developed market, but there's still, I think, an increase in demand for more what they call business partner type of roles. It's a very fancy word, obviously. It's like, wow, business partner, what does that mean, right? It's more about understanding what the users want, right? Because I think in the past, there's been a bit of a detachment. Like, I'm from HR, you're from a different department, so we separate. There's not a lot of communication. But now, when we talk about business partnership, it's really partnering with the hiring managers to really understand what they want, and at the same time, partnering with outsourced partners. It could be us, for example. You know, a lot of multinationals, they partner with Michael Page in creating this, you know, pretty much a one-stop shop relationship. You know, they work with us, we source for them, we deal with the users, and then it makes the whole recruitment process more efficient. IT, so once again, you know, hardware, software, you know, cloud. There's a lot of different demands for new technology, and particularly in the software development app side. Office manager, I'm going to skip that. Procurement supply chain. When we talk about procurement supply chain, the area I want to elaborate on is more on the strategic sourcing side. So in the past, a lot of organizations, they'll do all the sourcing and procurement in-house. But now the strategy is to really do a lot of stuff outsourced. You know, they only want to focus on the key, you know, strategic spends. So what a lot of organizations do nowadays is they actually have a spend level. So anything under a certain spend level would be outsourced to, could be Southeast Asia or China. You know, they have a team who does all the basic sourcing. When it comes to more strategic sourcing stuff, and in most cases, it could be more on services, or it could be on the different categories. That's more on the high-level end side. That's the stuff that is mostly based in Hong Kong or other major cities. Okay, professional services, talked about. When it comes to property instruction, in particular in a place like Hong Kong, I mean, Hong Kong, you know, this is one of the key markets, obviously. I mean, if you look at the buildings around us, you know, there's always a shortage of talents in that sort of civil engineering, construction sort of market, okay? And certainly from a salary perspective, you know, employers are realizing they need to pay premium for these people because they're really sought after, they're really hard to find. Because a lot of people are obviously, you know, once they take on the education route, they don't really want, you know, let's be honest, a lot of construction work is pretty hard labor. They'd rather be in more of a skill-based or talent-based type of employment, as opposed to doing more sort of that hard stuff. But in comparison, when we look at the real estate side of things, that's a very different story. Real estate developer roles, when we talk about project management roles, when we talk about people who do the leasing, that's more on the sales side. Yeah, absolutely. There's always demand for that in Hong Kong, in any sector, industrial, commercial, residential, you name it. Sales and marketing. So generally speaking, there's two types of functions in sales and marketing. There's the business development group, and there's the key account management group. They're always sought after in the market. As I mentioned, who doesn't want a good salespeople who can bring in revenue to your company, right? So these are always roles that are always sought after, and clients are willing to pay premium for these people. The second part is the digital side. It's still a fairly new concept. I mean, everyone seems to get an understanding or know what digital is from a conceptual point of view, but in terms of what it actually is, what it does, how does it influence consumer behavior, it's still a fairly new concept. And this is something that is really in really high demand. But the interesting thing is clients also have a concept of what they want. For example, I want to enhance the user experience. Quite abstract, isn't it? The question is how, right? Does it simply mean making a beautiful website? Or does it mean just having access on your tablet or on your iPhone? Or does it mean other things? What is the best way to channel into the right audience? So that's definitely an area of demand. So I believe this is, so this is the last slide pretty much. Just to summarize, once again, very conscious of time here. Going back to pretty much my first or second slide. Hiring activity, I mean, the market sentiment is still very positive. Okay? There's still a lot of demand to hire people. And we foresee that this will continue this year, okay? But for selective, I mean, it's case by case, by industry and by different market sectors. Absolutely, salary is still driving turnover. As you can see with some of the percentages I share with you, particularly in the China and Taiwan markets, clients are offering 20, 30% for people to change jobs. And at times, that can be quite a challenge for organizations to beat or match those salaries. Non-financial rewards, okay? So other than salary, what are the other things that employees look for? Work-life balance. What are the fringe benefits? They want to look for flexi hours. Those are some of the things that employers are offering to retain their staff. Okay. Typically, we're talking about a 1 to 5% increment. This is more of a year-on-year adjustment. Okay. And as I mentioned earlier, that's more in reflection of inflation change. And last but not least, we're talking about increased demand for soft skills. Communication skills, once again, ability to influence, ability to communicate. That is really important. It's very rare that employers nowadays just hire someone who sits in the corner and does their thing and leaves work. It just doesn't happen. Companies, clients, they're always looking for future leaders. Yeah. Pharmacy, medical. First of all, this is not really an area that we recruit for, to be honest. And it's a very specialized technical function. I mean, don't get me wrong, there's absolutely demands for medical practitioners in Hong Kong. But it's not really a market that we focus on.
And this is all forward-looking, 2015.
Yeah.
Predictions.
Yeah. Yes, correct. Cool. So that pretty much concludes the content of the presentation. I guess we'll move on to Q&A.